All right, what is up, my friends? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are joined with Revangroup, and we are going to talk about the mystical 50% of your FICO model that is really the most important. That's the joke. There is no mystical thing, strategy, or tactic that we're going to talk about today, but we are going to cover probably a very important piece that you're either missing or is the reason why you're in your 720s to 750s and still getting denied for credit cards, or you're getting really low limits. We're going to crack that open and explain to you probably what's going on with your report and why that's happening. All right, let's dive in. All right, cool. Rev, what's up, man? Thanks for jumping in with me.
Yeah.
I appreciate you, man. Every time we do these, and just to give the audience a little background, is you and I jumped on a call and we were kind of bullshitting, and you started kind of running through all this, and I'm like, man, we should have been recording. So new rule with Rev and I is that we're going to record every single time because I love the perspective. Like, you come from a background of working for Chase for what, 10 plus years, and you've been in the game long enough that your stuff is so seasoned now. Like, you have a long history, which let me pull up my screen. So we're going to pull up the old FICO chart here really quick, and that way everyone's on the same page. So everyone's seen this before, right? If not, you should you should spend some time looking at this. But you have a long payment history, and you also have a long average age of account. And you're noticing a pattern with people in the Discord community specifically talking about low limits that they're getting, even though they're in the 750s. They've got 4 years average age of account or 6 years of payment history. And we're seeing some people convoluting these two factors. And what they're convoluting, they're convoluting payment history and average age of account. They're actually two different things. Okay, let me say that again. Payment history and average age of account are two separate things. Having a strong payment history is a good thing. Average age of account is the thing that's probably affecting you and you didn't even know it. So yeah, let's dive in, man. I'll kind of give you the floor. I know that you had that example and that person that you're going back and forth with in the community. I don't know if you want to reference that again.
Yeah. Like I said on our previous conversation, I think the biggest issue people have, right, is throwing average age accounts to the side and not realizing its correlation to payment history, right? So the two of them combined are 50% of your score. In my personal opinion, age should have more of a factor on the score itself, but it has a major factor with the financial institutions, right? So if you're somebody with 1 year average age of accounts, you're never going to, and all things being the same, you're never going to beat someone that has 4 year average age of accounts, right? There's payment history is payment history, but payment history can't be there without the age. Those two go hand in hand. So you could have, let's say, 2 years of great payment history, but you can end up having 1 year average age of accounts because the volatility of you obtaining accounts, right? The example I gave you before was if you get 4 accounts and a year later, those 4 accounts are all 1 year old. How they calculate age of accounts is in months. It's not in years, it's in months. So they go 4 accounts, 12 months, that's 48 months. They take the 4 accounts, divide it into 48 months, and they come up with the 1 year average age of accounts, right? But if you then go and add 4 more new accounts in that same year, you now have to go 96 divided by 8, right? Then you're like, wait a minute, what's going on? Why is my age chopping down? What's going on here? How's that happening? And then so they go to the bank and they're like, wait a minute, I've got, let's say, like the person in the group, I have six years of history. 6 years of history is not the same as 6 years average age of account. Now, somebody with 6 years average age of accounts could get denied, right? Just on pure volatility. That's always a scenario, especially in this economic position we're in right now and the uncertainty of the election coming up and all that, but that's another thing. But what people tend to always overlook is the volatility as they get these accounts. And then they like, wait a minute, what's going on? Like you said, I have the 750 credit score. I have, let's say, 80,000 in credit. Why am I getting denied? Or why am I getting these low limits? And I've said this to you in many conversations, and I've said it into the group. That credit limit and that interest rate should tell you all you need to know about what that interest or what that institution thinks of your profile. So yes. Let's take the one with Navy, right? If Navy gives you a $7,000 card with an $8,000 or 18% interest rate, that is one, a really low limit comparable because big limits for credit purposes don't start till it's 10,000 plus, right? 2, the 18% is the highest interest rate they offer. Those two factors tell you all you need to know. So from that point, what should click is say, okay, 1, why did I get such a low limit? Comparable, right? And then 2, why is the interest rate so high? The interest rate to me means more. more because your interest rate is directly correlated to your credit worthiness.
Yeah, the risk factor.
Exactly. So if the interest rate is the highest they offer, they're telling you without actually telling you that they don't trust you enough, right? So here's a low limit. Here's the highest interest rate to kind of hedge themselves against you carrying balances, because who wants to pay 18% interest on a $5,000 balance, right? No one, because that can start to rack up really fast. But again, people look at, oh, I got great payment history, or I'm always on time and all this other stuff, but this is happening to me. Okay, so let's correlate and find out what's and why that's happening. So you have amount owed. Everyone knows the standard rule. Don't push it over 30, because even if someone like myself or even GW, who have phenomenal profiles and his is longer and bigger than mine, at over 30% is the cutoff. I'm going to get hit at that point because I have so much credit that if I'm carrying 30% of it, that's a lot. That's a lot of debt, right?
Yeah, they would also, to chime in, they would also be looking at the pattern. They'd be looking at the pattern.
100%.
Only carrying like 1-2%. All of a sudden you're at 30%. These behavior patterns they're looking at more and more. Remember back to FICO 10, guys. We covered this in a dedicated video. FICO 10 and 10T is they're starting to look at a 24-month snapshot now of your history. So if they're seeing 1%, and then all of a sudden 30%, you're going to get immediately slapped with adverse action. It would actually be smarter to start to load that on slowly over time, like go from 1 to 5, maybe 5 to 10. And again, this is worst case scenario. If you even had to do this or needed to do this, that's how you'd want to do it. Add it on slowly. You couldn't go from 1% to 30% overnight. You can expect some phone calls. You can expect some people to be calling in some loans on you, some banks.
Amounts owed, everyone knows. The standard ideal rule, especially for new profiles, don't push yourself past 1 to 3%, right? You can stretch that number for like maybe a cycle as you get a profile that's more aged, but why? Because they can always go back and look and see where these things were happening, and if it's a consistent thing, then there's an issue, right? That's what they're gonna immediately assume, because they don't know you, they don't talk to you directly, so they don't know. The key component which gets lost in all of this is always average age of accounts. But if you keep grabbing accounts and you keep grabbing accounts, all you're doing is chopping down, because you're adding a 0 to the number you already have. So every account, and it doesn't matter, it's credit cards, it's car loans, mortgages, all of that stuff can chop your profile down. Mortgages don't affect you the same because banks in particular look at it differently, right? Because it's a home, it's an asset, right? Cars are not quite the same because they're not real assets in the essence, because they're movable objects. So banks look at them not quite like homes, but not like credit cards or physical money that you can just burn them with, right? So it is what it is. But people always seem to never address the average age of account part of it, which goes hand in hand with payments. They are 1A and 1B in my personal opinion. Because if you have great history, you can have bad average age accounts and get denied.
Yeah.
And I will guarantee you 99% of the time, it's going to be your average age of accounts due to volatility, all these inquiries, all these new accounts popping up, et cetera, et cetera. And I said to somebody in the group, 6 years or 5 years or 4 years, whatever it is, of history is not the same as 6 years of average age of accounts. You can have 6 years of history, but due to volatility, that ends up being 2 years or 3 years average age of accounts, because you just keep adding new stuff.
Yeah. And I think that's the big takeaway here, is that most people don't even realize that they're doing it. But throughout the year, how many times are you going back to the trough to add new accounts? How many times are you going and adding more activity? For most people, it's quite a bit. They're going back 2, 3, 5 times throughout the year, or they've been in a garden for 6 months and they think, oh, now I'm going to go get a couple cards, but I can only go get a couple because my profile isn't quite there yet. So I'm just going to kind of dance around and, well, this was a pre-call, this was a pre-approval, this was a this was a that. So it's like by the time, 365 days rolls on, is you're adding on and going back to the trough 2, 3 times, 4 times.
Yeah.
Even when you're quote unquote gardening, we've now seen it with a lot of community members. And then when it's like a year later, when they actually want to go back to do an ad spree, they're being negatively affected by that average age of account that got hit now, and they don't even really notice that. They don't even really know.
I had a private conversation, and one of our things when me and G-Dub talked afterward, and I said to a great degree, and this is not a knock on anyone in particular, it's he has a very unique unique profile. So he can get away with doing things that almost no one in the group can.
Yeah.
Because like for me, I'll take it, I'll put it on me because I know what my profile is, right? So like I explained before, 18 was the first time I ever got credit, and I'm about to turn 47 in a month and a half, right? And I've had great credit all that time. So 28 years, right? 29 years go almost. His profile is extensively longer than mine because of his age. He can go do that. He is the only person I know that has credit on our level that has that many credit cards. So what it does is it innates people and it entices them, but you have to realize, yeah, if you have a 20-year profile, you can get away with stuff like that. Most people that have profiles like myself or like G Dubs, most of them, and he agreed in that conversation when I spoke with him, they don't have 15 credit cards. They don't. The top level of FICO people who sit in that top 1%, 2%, whatever you want to call it, that have 20 plus year profiles, etc., they do not have that many credit cards. They just don't. They know why they don't, right?
We talked about this. How many cards do you have? If you
9.
9.
That's it. 9.
Just for some perspective, guys, 9. He has access to many zeros.
Yeah.
I'll just leave it at that. But as the profile gets older, and as you go longer and longer in the game, there's very few people like GW. And I know that like he said, it's very enticing. You know, you start to get FOMO. Everyone wants to be like GW. He does have time on his side though. And he's not had to come back from a bankruptcy. He's never filed bankruptcy in his life. And I don't know about your parents, but my parents filed bankruptcy many times. And that's the lessons that's what I got to see as a kid. That's the, things that was ingrained in my brain growing up, was that when the weight became too heavy, you just file bankruptcy. And that somehow like fixes it. But, it doesn't. So anyways, there's not a lot of people like him, first off. And secondly is what I noticed is with like the high earners and the high FICO score people is that the longer they're in the game, the less cards they have, because they're focused on a core handful of cards that do a very specific thing to help raise the quality of their life. And they cut out all additional fat. They cut out all management of any additional cards because they don't want the headache and they don't need it. Is that pretty spot on?
So did you hear the thing about my wife's father? Could you hear that much?
No.
All right, so I'll take something I know to give them a parameter, right? My wife's father is G Dub's age. He's a little bit older, but he's got 4 and his profile is spotless on the same level, right? He's only got 4 and one of them is the black card. Her mother, same thing. She's got 5 and one of them used to be called the Palladium when she first got it. It's now called the JP Morgan Reserve. She had that, right? And that's it. They've never had, in all the 20 plus years that I've been with my wife, they've never had more than that. That's the norm for people on that top level because they know, right? As you chop this thing down, it takes forever. I'll give you an example. I'll give you a number, right? So let's take say G Dub, right? He's got 30 years plus of history, but let's take 30 as a number. Let's say he had 20 cards and then he decided to go on these sprees since he's been in your group. Okay, he's got 20 cards or 15 or whatever it was. Let's say 20 over that 30 years. That's 360 months, right? Roughly. Yeah, 360 months. Take that and divide that by that number of cards, and that puts him at like 18 years of history, just simplistically. So he could go on those app sprees that he's done in your group with these credit unions and these things he's done, and it not even register a blip on his radar, because 4 or 5 cards is not going to chop his average age of accounts to make him a threat to those institutions that he wants to get stuff from, right? And of course, all the financials he's got behind that just makes it even more so for him, myself included. Like the most recent card I had 10 before I got rid of the platinum, and because they just kept nerfing the card, so I got rid of it. 18 years, 19 years I had that card, nerfed it. I said, I'm done, right? The most recent card I have, and it's because I travel so much, is the City Executive card. Because of my history, what did they start that card at? Like $30,000 or something like that. And then they just recently raised it. And because I use it, it is exactly, it is literally, but my average age of accounts is past 10 years. I mean, a lot of my cards that I have out, even the Navy cards I have, they're both like 10 years old because I got both of them within the first few months, 4 months of being with Navy. July of this year made 10 years that I've been with Navy.
Yeah,
I got the one one card, they gave me 25. I got the more rewards. They gave me 25, and then I got the flagship. I wanted, I think it was like 4 or so months later, they gave me another 25. And then I just raised them until they were maxed out, and they're maxed out at like 44 and 36. I think the Navy card is my lowest one at 36, right? So I'm not chopping down nothing because my profile is so extensive that even if I add 1 or 2 cards because they're interesting to me or they fit something, like the most recent card I got was the Executive Mastercard, right? Because I'm American Airlines Executive Platinum, it made sense for me to have that card, right? And so I was like, okay, it's time. I need that. But I don't fall for the, oh, look at this nice little shiny thing in the window, I always call it. Because as you keep seeing that, like, let's be real, these companies keep adding new shiny things. You're just going to keep getting the new shiny things. You got to break yourself away from that habit so then you can focus on your average age of accounts matching your payment history in a sense, right? So then if your average age of accounts comes up, that means your payment history comes up. But your payment history can't come up without your age being there, because without age, you can't have payments. If you don't have nothing, there's nothing, right? So they go hand in hand. But if you keep chopping that down, the disproportionate negative you're creating on your profile, you don't really see. Why don't you see it? Because the other surrounding fluff is holding your profile up. So the fluff is that mixed account thing. No one really cares. They don't really care because credit card, when you were looking for a credit card, they're not looking at your mix. They're looking at comparable, right? Credit card. So the mix doesn't come into play there. That's just fluff for your credit score overall. People pay too much attention to the credit score. I always say it in your group, you have to look at the profile. What is the profile saying? Yeah, is the payment history there? Is the utilization down? If the utilization is up and your average age of accounts is down, you've just created a double win. And you've either created a scenario where you set yourself up to be declined, or you set yourself up specifically to get low limits and high interest rates. Now you're starting from a bad point. Like, why would you put yourself in a position to get a $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 limit when you can position your profile better by not chopping the age down and then get a $20,000 or $15,000 or whatever it is, $25,000? Makes no sense. And in this climate in particular, you do not want to be chopping your profile down like that. And with the election coming up and us not knowing what's going to happen and how things, and whether it's a new administration or whatever it is, you have no clue what's happening down the road. So you have no clue what the economy or what the financials are going to look like for banks in the next 8 to 9 months from now, when the new administration gets in and they implement all their rules. So you want to position yourself to be in your best position. And that starts at, okay, yeah, you have great payment history. Keep your utilization down, right? If your profile is a couple years old, make sure it's no more than 1 to 3% at max, right? At max, and then go from there. Don't chop the age down by just keep getting stuff. And that, I heard someone say it in the group, and this is a bad mindset, right? To fall into that, the low hanging fruit mindset. Oh, I could just get that, so I got it.
I was pre-approved, so I just got it. Well, they gave it to me, so I took it.
No. If you know that that's the case, then that should be the number one reason to not, right? If you're chopping your profile down, which I don't recommend, I'm perfect example of that. Then why are you chopping your profile down for an inferior thing, right? A low limit, a high interest rate. It's counterintuitive to what you really want, because now you're starting from a bad point anyway, right? You're starting from, let's say, $5,000, $6,000 limit, highest interest rate, or high interest rates. Now you're trying to peel the limit up and peel the interest rate down. Unfortunately, Navy will allow you to do that easily and get your interest rate dropped, but other institutions don't allow that as easy.
With Navy, you can call in each year and ask for a reduction.
Exactly. They'll entertain those things year after year. The other institutions don't.
It's just such a bad place to start from, though. You're starting from a place of digging yourself out of a hole, whereas, like, you really need to take a step back, and I would suggest to figure out, what are the core needs that you've got. Like, I think a high cashback card would be with a good, limit on it would be the baseline for everybody, whether that's a 3% card, or I know there was some 5% cards kicking around. Those seem to get nerfed. So I think 3%-ish is probably about what you're going to max out at as an everyday card, especially if you've got a 4 years average age of account or less, or, you've got 100,000 or less in credit. Like, this should probably be your number one goal. And then if you do travel, or over the next 12 months, you are traveling a lot, we need to start looking at travel cards or gas cards, centric cards where they've got, a 3-2-1, or they've got, you get into the Amex ecosystem or the Chase ecosystem to where there's bridging across multiple cards that you can then cash in those rewards to do things with, like getting gas or traveling, flights, hotels, etc. But yeah, like I think everyone needs to kind of reassess their network of cards and what they're using them for. And it's
100%.
kind of shifting out of the mindset of let's, shotgun approach, splatter against the wall approach to see how many cards we can get because we're just trying to get high limits, right? But if we could just get one card that had a $50,000 limit, do you really need the other 5 or 10 that you're about? Of course not.
No.
So how about we just try and go and get the one that's going to give us a large limit that we can end to work with, and we can put 1% on it and not have it be, $5 or $50, that we can put on the card without it starting to negatively affect us. We can actually start to put some usage on that thing, and then, start to build out our network of cards based on the need that we have as an individual.
100%
approach, then a lot of people, and I understand we're kind of breaking out the whole credit space. I feel like is breaking out of this old adage that was kind of safeguarded by like the gurus who charged you like $1,000. And we're breaking out of that into like actual logic, actual common sense with using these tools, because credit is a tool. And, there's a lot of countries in the world that have no credit system. And so America is the land of the opportunity, my friends. I don't care what you're seeing on a TV. As bad as it could get, I still think we're a long way, miles away from it being so bad that there's other places that are better in terms of the opportunity that you have in America. It's second to none, guys. It really is. And I say that a lot. It's because I've been to a lot of places. I've been to places to where, they clean themselves with their hand and they don't wash their hands after. They're doing their business outside in the waterways. I've been to those places. I can tell you about how it's not very nice. And so then, that's the basic quality of life, but all the way on up to like opportunities and being able to leverage such an amazing tool like credit, go and build your life and build generational wealth. It's just stupid. It really is stupid.
100%. I mean, I tell you like this, right? At the end of the day, there's so many companies out there and there's so many card issuers, right? And I get it. People want to get the high limits. I understand it, right? Everyone starts from somewhere. I think we had this conversation. Like, I think my very first credit card ever was the same. It was within the same year that I got my car loan when I was 18. And I'm going to school, and my mom recommended that I get a card that I can have and pay for things while I'm on campus, all this different stuff, yada, yada, yada. And it was like First Premier or something like that, something to that effect. I don't even know if they're around anymore, but obviously I still don't have it. But so, and back then it was different. I remember G-Dub and I talking about this. Back then, there was no such thing as $20,000, $30,000 starting limits. That wasn't a thing, right? So $1,500, $2,000, $3,000, that was a really good limit way back then. And even more so with G-Dub, even before that, it's probably less, right? Because credit cards haven't been around forever. It's a more modernized thing, right? People just don't realize it. But for me, if you have 15 credit cards, you have probably 7 cards that are crossing each other at least.
Yeah.
So it makes no sense to have that many cards, because you not only have you just destroyed your profile in that process of these sprees, and I don't knock sprees, because you can go get 4 cards if you're starting out or doing what you're doing and then let those age. But it needs to be the 4 cards that are most essential to your lifestyle and what you're doing, right? And then just let them age. Let them age out. Because if you have those 4 cards for, let's say, 2 or 3 years, they're going to probably be ideal for that period of time. There's not going to be any cards that come out, that all these 10, 20 cards that come out that are going to beat all 4 of those cards that you just have to go get. There might be card with one category better, but the rest not so much. That's just shiny shit in the window that they're trying to get you to get, tie you in. Why? Swipe fees. Yes. You know what I mean? So it is what it is. AK interchange fees is what they're really called. But no, if you have those 4 cards and you let them age to 2 or 3 years, okay, so now you have 3 years, right? So that would be per card. That would be, 36 months, right? On each card. So those 4 cards will be 3 years average age of account. If you go get one more card, you're not going to move the age that much to where it would hamper you. So there's another nice card 2, 3 years down the road that, that one fits into my life. Okay, fine, go get it. Right? But if you've had those 4 cards for 6 months and then you go get 2 more cards, you've just now added 2 zeros to that number and you've chopped your profile down even more. Then you say, oh, wait a minute. I like this. And this low hanging fruit, which I hate that term. Now you've just added a couple more zeros. Yeah. Now you're sitting there with, let's say you're sitting there with 7 or 8 cards and you've got maybe 50,000 or so in limits. Was that worth it? Because when you circle back around and you do what a lot of people do and you come to those institutions and they, one, decline you, or two, best case scenario, give you a really low limit with a higher interest rate. And then you're like, what happened?
Yeah. And you're not even going to use the card anyways. So if you started, a good piece of advice for people would be is think of every card in terms of like, am I going to use this for the next 2 to 4 years? And if you're not, then it.
No,
now,
it's not working.
I do have a question for you, and I want your take on this because everyone seems to have a different take on this, but it's completely relevant to what we're talking about with age and open accounts and closing accounts. What is your take on closing accounts? Because there is 2 camps, and so I want to hear your take on this.
I think I've spoke about this in the group before,
Yes.
Specifically when I mentioned I closed my 18, 19-year-old platinum card. Me in particular, it didn't even bleep on my radar. For a multitude of reasons, it won't. Because one, it's going to stay on your profile for 10 years. And the effect of that card cannot be any more, right? That card is going to be there for 10 years, producing 18 years of age to the profile it saved. It's all exactly. It's already set in stone. So that doesn't move it one way or the other. There's a fine line to closing cards, right? If you're a newer profile, no, you shouldn't do that. You don't have enough age to want to do that. Right? You'd keep it there. And I don't advise getting cards, especially when you're first getting in the game, getting cards with annual fees. That is the dumbest thing ever. You're paying money to have a card. For that, you might as well just get a secured card that graduates in 6, 8, 10 months, whatever it is. There's a lot of them out there. Get one of those that graduate. A lot of credit unions offer them. I know there's a bunch of them, credit unions in New York, that offer those. A bunch of them, right? I know Jersey has them. I know that for sure. I know Pennsylvania has. Like, those places are all around me, so I've looked and I've known. And I'm pretty sure every state has at least 1 or 2 credit unions that does the same. Get one of those. But for me, closing credit cards, there's always was this stigma that if you close credit cards, it hurts you. No, that's not really a thing because that card doesn't leave your profile for 10 years. Good accounts in good standing that you close or the bank closes for lack of use don't go nowhere. They stay there for 10 years. So I'm in the camp of it depends on what your profile is, right? If you're a more seasoned profile, 4, 5, 6 years old, closing a credit card isn't going to mean much, right? Just not. Unless you're talking about closing a card that has a very significant amount of your overall limits attached to it. That's different because that affects you on the back end. And this kind of wraps into something else that I meant to mention earlier, right? What people don't realize, payment history is payment history, right? Amounts owed is amounts owed. That doesn't move. New credit is new credit. But in the age of accounts and in the credit mix of accounts, right? There's other factors that dig into those numbers. Right? So let's take credit mix, right? It's 10%, right, of your, you have the thing up. Yeah, it's 10% of your overall credit. But in that mix, what's weighed is current and what's not is not weighed as much, right? So let's say you have a mortgage, you have a car loan, you have multiple different loans on your profile similar to mine, right? On the number that produces, 10% of 850 is like 85. So 85 points of your profile come from that, right? So if you have just credit cards there, credit cards make up a percentage of that 10%. Mortgages make up a percentage of that 10% and everything else. So installment loans, credit card mix, and then specifically mortgages, credit cards, and loans. They make up their own percentage. I don't think people realize that. So it's why you can have, let's say, great payment history, great low utilization. You're not getting a bunch of new credit like that per se, or length of credit, your age is good, but you don't get close to that 850. You're stuck in that 825, 830 range. It will correlate directly to one of those things. Either you don't have an installment loan or your installment loan you have that shows on your report is paid off, right? But the percentages they've never released. But you must know within that 10%, that's exactly why you don't have that 840, 845, or even 850 because somewhere in those pieces are missing. Somewhere, somehow, some way. way. Same thing with age of account. The installment loans and the credit cards are actually calculated differently to that percentage. So credit cards, because they're the easiest to get, don't count as greatly in that age. They still count as age, but there's pieces broken down. How much of that age is credit cards? How much of that age is loans and installments, mortgages, cars, personal loans, whatever? I've never even seen somebody address that on social media.
Me neither. Me neither. Another thing that I always am referencing and talking about is like a good way to base this is set off of census data. I don't know if they actually do this. I assume they kind of do. Whether this is some like super duper algorithm in the background, I don't know. Maybe, but it's like, okay, if somebody at 35, the average person is already married, has 2 kids, has 2 cars, has a mortgage, has all these things, right? Then, and you don't at 35, then that looks odd to them, right? So maybe this comes up in underwriting. Maybe this is an automated, like I said, algo thing. I'm not sure, but basing where should I be at for your age and what should my score and all that look like? A simple corollary or parallel would be to just think of census data and where somebody at that age should be based on what everyone in America is telling, the report that they are. So I think that's a really easy tool to use. Kind of measure yourself against, as you're moving through building up your credit, right?
Yeah. Circle back to the main question was, listen, I tell people when they ask me that question, because I've been asked that question a bunch of times, listen, every profile is different and relevant. But I would say this, if you want to close an account where it's not relevant to your lifestyle anymore, right? But if you're going to close that account, take into consideration how much of your limit that card is, because that's when it can hurt you, right?
Don't make it the highest limit card,
exactly.
That you're going to use for comparable credit. So now you drop from like, that's your 15K card, and then the next one is like 7. Well, if you go get new credit, they're going to match 7, or more likely to match 7 than the 15.
Yeah,
so that would be doing it in that situation, right?
But don't be afraid to hold on to a card because you're afraid of it damaging your profile. If those things don't come into play, it's not your highest limit card that a majority of your profile, or that's really it, right? Or you got like a new profile, like 1-year-old, two-ish year old profile. Once you hit that magic 2-year number, that's when your profile starts to move drastically the other way, and things start to affect it less. Not like let's say utilization, right? Perfect example, right? That 2-year magic mark is when your utilization can creep up a little bit more and it not affect your profile or at all, or affect it very minimal, right? 5-year is that very next bigger step to where you don't really see movement, anything below 10% at all. Anything above 10 might be 1 point, 2 point here or there, right? And I don't know an exact number because they've never released it, but I've done a lot of digging into it and paid enough attention over the years to my own profile to know that those are the money spot, that 2-year mark. Because if you ever look at financials, and working at JP Morgan for so long, almost 13 years, like the one thing that institutions know emphatically from data, pure data, right, is that people on average in America default on loans over $5,000 within the first year, right? It's why the 2-year marker is that thing in FICO, I would assume, because FICO definitely talks to banks. They inevitably talk to banks. It happens. They have communications because the banks are relying on them to accurately place the profile so then they can analyze the data and then make a decision based on the data, right? Mm-hmm. So that anything over 10, that becomes an even bigger problem, right? It's why personal loans are the hardest type of financing to get because of those data points, right? You can go get a $10,000 car loan before they would ever just give you $10,000 cash.
Yeah. Unsecured, for sure.
You know what I mean? And it just works that way. And so if you have one of those profiles that, let's say on average, because what is the average on credit score in America now? Like 730 or something like that, 730, 740?
I don't remember. We'll insert it.
It's something in that range-ish area. So let's say 740-ish or so, right? Okay, that's fine. That's a good credit score relevant to the profile. This is why I always tell people, don't pay attention to the number, right? The number is irrelevant comparable to the profile. G-Dub being the example, right? Mm-hmm. He has 40 years of history or whatever. He might not have an 850 credit score, but it does not matter, right? This other guy who has, let's say, 4 years of history, has no real debts, whatever, he might have an 850, but he ain't beating GW in anything. The bank will give GW thousands and thousands of dollars at lowest of interest rates, myself, similar, before they would ever give that person anything better than us. I had a perfect example with my brother, and I told him, pay attention, right? And right now, he's got 2.8 years average age of accounts. Not history, but average age of accounts, right? And he was always, as we were building him up, comparable. Like, I got to get to you. I got to get to you. You got to walk. You got to crawl before you walk, buddy, right? And I would tell him, we're looking at what they're offering and what the interest rates are. So we can get a good gauge on, like, say, what Chase thinks your profile is and what we built it to, and what American Express thinks your profile is and what we built it to. And then we go from there and we analyze. So now he's on a cool down period, right? He's on a cool down period for, at a bare minimum, a year, year and a half. He's not touching nothing. So we build it up. So then we say, okay, fine. Now we haven't added nothing. We're going to add a whole nother year, year and a half to the profile. And then in that time frame, we might add another card or two and say, okay, where are we at? We're at 4 or 5 years of average age of accounts at this point. Okay, fine, let's go, right? But we always gauging it from that standpoint. And I always try to make him not gauge it. And that's what I told G-Dub. A lot of guys get enamored because they see him and they see all of these things he's pulling the trigger on, but not realizing or not admitting why that's the case. I don't know which one it is, either not knowing or not admitting. But again, I always tell him, when him and I talk, we talked for like about 40 minutes or so in one of those conversations when you were on and you got off. And I said, they can't do what you do. So I always try to bring a little bit of the reality into the fact. And so you have to pay attention to these pieces. What are you doing to your profile? And is it worth where you want to be, extending that 5 years down the road to get there because you're chopping it down now? Or do you want to wait a couple years and get there 3 years ahead of time?
So what would you suggest if somebody's got credit rebuilder cards, they got some Capital One sandbox, garbage, they got some other, rebuilder cards, when would you say they should start closing those down? Like, they've already got, let's say, upwards of there, and there's several people in the community like this. They've got now upwards of 100,000 or more in credit, but they still got some of these lingering rebuilder cards. I would say probably after 2.5 years, you could do one and test it. But I'm curious to hear what you would say.
No, I agree. If their profile is a solid 2+ years, solidly, and I'm talking about average age of accounts, not payment history. Don't misconstrue the two. Like we said earlier, 2 years of payment history is not the same as 2 years age of account if you're getting car. You've chopped that down to be considerably less than that in that process, right? But if you have 2+ years, a solid 2.5, and I can take a perfect example of my brother. He's got 2.8 right now, right? Mm-hmm. And he's in that same boat at 5 zeros behind the number. Then I would close one of them down and see what you see, right? Because here's the reality. And people don't realize this. Working at JP Morgan and having direct access, because when I first started working for JP Morgan, I started working as a paid intern in the 90s. And then I became a full-time, full-fledged 100% employee once I graduated, right? At that time, Chase was not a part of JP Morgan. That didn't happen until the early 2000s. People don't realize that. They think that has been a company indefinitely forever. No, it was Chase Manhattan, and JP Morgan was its own entity. JP Morgan bought Chase Manhattan and turned it into JP Morgan Chase. But in all of that process, I say that to say, looking at those things, institutions know. Like, so let's take Capital One. Universally, institutions know Capital One as a subprime company because 85% or so of their customer base is subprime customer base, right? So when they see those things, they know what they're looking at. Same thing with like the lesser companies, like let's say, what's some of those lesser companies? It's been Credit so long.
Credit One would be one.
Credit One, perfect example. Perfect example. They know what they are. So when they see that, they have a good parameter to know, okay, this person, this is why I tell people never go down those roads with those people. Always get and secured cards that graduate have been around for quite a bit of time. Mm-hmm. It's just they weren't a known entity for quite a bit of time to people outside them now, right? Social media has made people more aware of them. Your group in particular has made people more aware of them, but they have been around for quite some time. Listen, I got with Navy 10 years ago. They had that card then.
Yeah. Yeah, the secured card. And I mean,
Yeah.
putting $1,000, $1,500 on a secured card is a whole lot better than getting a $200 Capital One card.
100%. I always advise people like this, like what we did with my brother, and I told him, right? It's the same thing. Like numbers are what interest institutions, right? But to your point before I move on, yes, if they've got 2.5 years of average age, close one of them down, see what happens, right? I promise you, your profile is not too new that it's going to do this massive damage, that the perception is out there that if I close an account down, I'm going to lose 30, 40 points. That's not reality. That's not how it works.
No, I did this, by the way. When I was at about 2.5 years, I closed down the crappy Capital Ones that I had, which I think one was $1,000 limit, one was maybe $1,500, and they were by far my most cards. And I think my score dropped like 5 points.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be much.
And trust me, again, I can never say this enough to people. The score is irrelevant. It's the profile that institutions look at, not the score. The score will be fine if the profile is fine. If the profile is not chopped down, the profile will be fine. The perfect example is if you have, let's say, 6 years of payment history, but you have a 750 credit score, not 6 years average age of account. You have 6 years of payment history, but your credit score is 750. There's a problem. It's either you have really high utilization, or you have a chopped down profile from getting too many cards. And those two things institutions do not like. They are 1 and 2 right behind payment history, not making payment history.
To me, in terms of credit scores, between a 700 and like a 750 is the biggest gray zone that exists in credit scores, because there's so many variables of like, if you just tweak this or change that, you're going to go way up or way down. And that hardest thing, I would imagine from an underwriter standpoint, I'd love if we had underwriters chime in the comments. I bet that's the biggest gray zone for them to navigate as an underwriter is the low 700s, because there's so much more that they're looking at. They're looking at people who are kind of just barely out of the credit rebuilding stage. They're looking at people that are new in credit, that have just done a couple secured cards and maybe some AUs. There are so many people that fit into that category. Whereas once you get above a 750, there's way more assumptions you can make about the score, the person. You notice coincidentally, the AAOA is higher. The payment histories are very high. Incomes are usually higher. It's kind of funny how that's almost like this big tipping point is between a low 700s and a mid 700s. You have just this huge shift in a demographic of the type of person. Yeah.
I'll tell you. So the person I was talking to, they were right at 739 in that gray zone, right? Because they chopped their whole profile down and whatever else that I might not know. But the past point is that 770, right? That 770 where you're right at the cusp of becoming very good. That point, right? So let's say 780, what is it? 780, I think, where it becomes very good, right? Yeah. And then you get to excellent at whatever it is, 800 or whatever it is. It's something like that, or 760, whatever. But it's in that range. That 7 to that 750 mark is dead, right? You're only there for one of 3 reasons. One, like you said, you're either rebuilt, you're new, or you've chopped yourself down. All 3 things are not good for an underwriter. It's harder to judge.
Yeah.
New, it's harder to judge rebuild. It's not as hard to judge someone who's chopped down but is responsible in paying their debt. It's not quite as easy. So they're in a more gray zone. But someone who's in that, say, 785, 790, 800 range, you're not there with volatility. You're not there with high utilization. You're not there with any type of missed payments at all, right? So you're more solid. Those people are easier to judge. And up to myself and G-Dub and everyone else that's in that topper echelon, those people are easy to judge. They would love to see people like that all the time, right? You don't get to 785, 790 with chopping up your profile, carrying high utilization, adding new accounts every year. No. You just can't. You're chopping it down too much, right? But I did, and again, to solidify, I do agree to whoever's in that zone, that's 2.5 years, close one. And especially if it has an annual fee, close it down. Get rid of the stigma that closing accounts negatively or adversely affect your account, because people and I get it, because of lack of information, they've always tied, I have to have a high score. Same example I gave earlier. That guy with that 845, 850, 4 years, 5 year, whatever, 6 years average age of accounts, he's not beating G-Dub. 10 out of 10 times he's losing.
Yeah.
And G-Dub might not have an 850. He might have an 820. But they're going to look at those 2 profiles and they're going to be like, yep, this guy, he's sort of good. He's okay. But you know what? Let's say the lowest interest rate is 18%. our highest is 29. That guy is going to get somewhere around 21, 22, and G-Dub's going to get the 18. That guy is going to probably get 15-ish thousand or so, give or take. G-Dub's going to get whatever the max number they'll allow his profile to start, 25, 30, whatever it is. And that is the difference between the profile and the score. The score is irrelevant. I never can say it enough, and I want people to understand that, but you cannot get the profile there if you keep chopping down your average age of account. It's so essential because banks will look at that. People don't even realize it. Utilization is utilization. It's either going to be high or it's going to be low, right? There's nothing to analyze there. Yeah. Payment history is payment history. Either you're paying or you're not paying. Age is different. Wait a minute. Why has he only got 1.6 years age? What's going on here? Now they got to dig into it. Oh, he's got like 10 accounts. What the hell?
Yeah.
Well, he's just got 3. Now they got to dig through it, right? Or they get that. I've seen it on social media too, and I laugh every time it happens. When you see those social media creators and they don't get an instant approval and they have to call in. You know how many times I've watched videos where that happened? And I'm like, he's getting too many accounts, right? Yeah. You know what's happening to you at that point? You've subjected yourself to someone implementing that institution's rule, how they see the rule.
They need more data.
Now, exactly.
You start to get, hey, can we get more pay stubs? Can we get W-2s? You start to get those questions. Even now that stuff's more common, yes, to a degree, because the interest rate environment that we're in, but in a zero bound interest rate that we were in for years and years, if you were getting hit for, pay stubs and W-2s, it's because they were seeing something in your profile that was throwing up a flag.
100%. All the things, and I cannot state this more, all of the pieces of your profile are what they are. Payment history is just that. It's not hard. What you owe, utilization, is what it is. New credit is what it is. You got loans. You got new ones. You got new credit cards. That is what it is. Same thing with your mix. Do you have a mortgage, whatever? All of that stuff, what they are. It's the age that is the thing. And why is this age what it is, right? It's the complex part of your profile because it's where all your accounts sit. And then they can see, okay, exactly. 100%. Best part. Best saying. It's where they're going to actually judge you, right? Because if your utilization is fine and everything else is fine, payment history, you don't got no missed payments, you say, okay, fine. Why is this happening? Because they dug into your average age of account and they don't like what they see. It is in my personal opinion, it is the second most. I don't know why FICO gave it such a low percentage of the score, because it is the first thing that banks will dig apart when your application goes into review. It is where they are going first. They are going nowhere else first, believe it. If your application goes into review, they are going to your average age of accounts because that's where they all sit. And they're going to dig them apart and see what it is. Okay, how much debt is he carrying with these loans and these credit cards? How many does he have? How often? All of that comes into play. And then they're like, nah, it's adverse, too much. Then you get that dreaded. There's a bunch of groups out there that'll convince you. I seen one, I can't remember the name of it. I wish I could off the top of my head. I haven't looked at them in quite a long time because I used to look in there. They had a map that would dictate if you got denials or if you got that pending under review thing on how to beat the system. You're not beating the system. If your application went into review, that means someone physically is looking at it, right? I used to hate that late night hack with Navy thing, because that's not a thing. It never was a thing. It's not how it works. Because you're under I used to hear them, like, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, right? When I first ever heard it. And I forgot who I first ever heard it from. They would be like, yeah, you call after 12 because no one's, what? That's not a thing.
No one's working, and then they're just going to go ahead and approve you for $20,000.
Do you think that, let's take Navy because they're the biggest. Let's take Chase because they're the biggest bank, right? Do you think Chase has people manning applications every day? No, that is an automated system doing it. It's the same thing for Navy. All institutions have automated systems. The only time someone physically is looking at your report is when it goes into review because their system does not think you qualify under what the parameters, the algorithm they've set for accepting profiles. So now you have someone physically looking at it. But there's this group, and I'm probably sure they still existed, because when I last knew, I think they had like 150,000 people in that group. And they had this whole map out of how to hack the system when it goes into review or you get a denial. I was like, hack the system? What? No, you're going to have to talk to somebody. How are you going to hack them? And I remember one of them was hang up and call back and hang up and call back. I was like, what? I was like, that's a lot. That is a lot to go through, right? So with all of this disinformation and dishonest information and stuff like that, it's easy for people to get bad information or factually inaccurate information or partially factually inaccurate information and then run with that because it fits the narrative of where they're trying to go. And then the one thing I always tell people, your profile is so important, right? And you want to build that profile, but why wouldn't you do the homework to know? There's never been a time where, and I think part of it's just my career background, right? I wasn't at JP Morgan managing these different things, asking someone else over here, how do I manage this? So the same could be true. You're not asking a stranger how to raise your kid, right? So you treat your profile like it's your kid, right? And you say, okay, what's the best way to get here the right way? One. Two, making sure I don't hit no speed bumps or roadblocks along the way because I had that information and it set me back 6 months or it set me back a year. And I always tell people the information is out there. I learned a lot of information from the career I was in, but I also learned a lot of information by going and doing the research and finding the information. Like, remember the thing I told you about those, how FICO, it doesn't go off your profile, but you no longer see them after a year on my FICO. You don't see the inquiries, right? I found that out by seeing it happen and saying, wait a minute, how'd that happen? And then going to find out how and why that happens. Yeah. Because after a year, those inquiries no longer calculate against your score. So FICO just removes it so you don't see it on my FICO, but if you go to your full credit report, you'll still see it there. But because it no longer calculates, anything you see on my FICO calculates against your score. And that's how they put it to me when I went and to go find out. I was like, okay, makes sense, I guess, whatever, but it is what it is. But again, information is out there, and especially in this day and age, like when we were growing up, internet came out, I was 15 years old, to give reference, right? I was 15. Yeah. I'm about to turn 47. The year it came out, I was 15, right? Like, so by the time I'm 21, yeah, it's 6 years old, but it's nothing. It was, I mean, and you're closer to my age than probably a lot of the guys in there, but it's nothing like it is then like it is now.
Yeah.
Like,
100%.
Like,
look at what we just did.
Yeah.
We're an hour in right now, and we've just essentially given a masterclass in FICO score and the model and how this actually works.
100%. Listen, and another reference point, Google came out in 98. I was 21.
Yeah.
It wasn't even a public company at that point.
That still messes me up thinking about that, man. That it was 98 that actually came out.
Yeah, they created Google in 98. They made it public in 2004. We didn't, in 98, like prior to them launching Google, we had AOL. It was nothing like Google at all.
The discs, baby.
Yeah, right? So to find this information, and this is why I'm built that way to a degree. I had to go find that information, literally. But you have the guys in the group, in particular the younger guys who are just starting out or the guys who are younger profiles just building, you have all of this at your fingertips to be able to know how and build that profile correctly and do it in the right manner. So then if you're 28, by the time you're 35, which is extremely young still, your profile is so rock solid that you won't get no, or you won't get a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 limit if that's what you're looking at, or you'll get a car loan and the interest rate, obviously now it's different, but your interest rate won't be double digits. You know what I mean?
I agree. I think that's actually a great place to end it, is like, well, obviously we just put in over an hour for you guys. This will be public on the channel. Yeah, we'd love to hear, your thoughts, what kind of struggles you're going through. Just comment below. Let us know what's going on with you. Any underwriters want to chime in on what we talked about earlier? I'd love to hear from you. We have had that happen in the past, by the way, on the channel. But yeah, this is just our small way of hopefully giving back and putting the right information in front of you for you to be able to execute in the field better decisions and get better outcomes, right? Because that's what it's all about. So anyways, Rev, thank you so much for putting in over an hour with me. Jam, stuff. And guys, enjoy, comment below, like, subscribe, do all the fun stuff. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Hey, you should subscribe. 60% of you are not subscribed yet. Right there. Okay, bye.